Good afternoon. I'm Hassan Fawal, founding director and chair of the Institute of Global Health and Human Ecology at the American University in Cairo. We have to interpret issues of health within a cultural and even a religious, nuanced fashion. And I think one of the biggest challenges that confronts the issues of aging has to do to education, whether the education of medical practitioners or health professionals in general, but most definitely the awareness that we need to raise among caregivers and among family. And to me, aging is not simply about the absence of disease or well-being, which we quite frequently talk about, but it's aging with dignity. And to me, dignity is associated with a measure of independence and a measure of functionality. You take someone who's worked their entire life, whether as a professional or even as in a rural area, as a farmer industry, who has remained active most of their life. And then we have this tendency, okay, from a cultural point of view, we may say it's respect, but we have this tendency to treat them as handicapped, as crippled, as incapable of doing things for themselves. When said individual makes it quite clear that they want that independence, they want that dignity, okay, I think that from a mental point of view is actually empowering to them. Yes. But you see this frustration in a lot of the elderly, where they essentially, leave me alone. I can do this for myself. I have two hands like you. And so I think we need this to embed this in the healthcare paradigm that we actually apply. To me, aging is a continuum of something that started at the very beginning. That net result of aging, if you say a person is aged because they're over 60, well, this actually started also from how we pay attention to our young. And so both ends of the spectrums, quite often from a professional point of view, from an educational point of view, we actually often neglect those two ends. But even the state needs to be educated. The whole purpose of a healthy aging paradigm is to be able to inform policy. And to inform policy correctly, we need that evidence. So there is that need of educating people who will collect that evidence, to be able to disseminate and communicate that evidence, but not just to policymakers, but also to family members, taking that hard science or that data and simplifying it where we can speak to a person at their level of education. So how do you take, highfalutin science and reduce it where you can explain it to O'Malley, who can't read or write, or her husband, okay? How do you get the message across while at the same time empowering that person, okay, to age with dignity, to educate their caregivers, that they allow them that degree of freedom and recognize the limitations of their functionality. And so I think from an educational point of view, from an academic point of view, it is essential that we educate, expose our students at these different levels of practice, not necessarily that this becomes their focus, but for them to actually sound like intelligent life forms, to articulate a message, and to contribute to well-being, okay? And so, we must recognize the challenges. We must actually come up with a holistic plan to address these challenges. And in an ever complex world, we need to actually build that discourse, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary discourses between the wide spectrum of those who are interested in healthcare, those who are interested in issues associated with community health. Thank you. For me, and this has been my personal philosophy through my life, is seeing the interconnectivity.
Okay.
For something to be effective, it must be translated in the language that people can actually understand. So there's the pillar of educating the educators. And so we all quite often see basically train the trainer program. So you have several audiences here. You have the audience that I train as an academician. You have the audience that is the receivers of that service who may or may not have a sophisticated education level. You have that audience of practitioner who needs to actually be informed because it's not part of their formal curricular training. And that may be a physician, it may be a nurse, it may be a diagnostician, it may be a social worker, and you have that audience that actually drafts that policy based on a profile that that researcher has actually provided for. Because an experience that I can generate in the Middle East, like in Egypt, may be equally applicable to Southeast Asia, may be equally applicable to Latin America. What is happening in Latin America may be something I can adopt in North Africa. What's happening in Southeast Asia may be a paradigm that I can adopt. But I will not have the know-how to recognize that unless there is appropriate communication. I will not be able to implement that unless I develop the skills to educate those who receive the service and those who actually draft the policy for that service.